Welcome to the Business Clicks podcast, the podcast that interviews business owners to discuss their struggles, strategies, and successes with using the power of the internet to grow their business. We discuss the transition from brick and mortar growth strategies to digital alternatives. We provide new and exciting tactics each business can use to be successful in this new digital world. I'm your host, Adam Barbro, and let's get stuck in. Welcome to this episode of the Business Podcast. Joining us today is Julian from Epoch Accounting. Julian, before we get started, there's one question I want to ask you, which is, what is one thing you believe will make a successful business in the years to come?
I think it's really interesting, Adam, in terms of, I suppose I sit back and I don't think the fundamentals of business really change in that, I suppose success in business, I've always said, is about doing a small number of simple things consistently and well. But obviously technology adapts, or technology changes pretty quickly, and particularly in my industry in accounting, the software is constantly changing on an almost daily basis. The way we interact with the ATO, for example, is changing on a regular basis. So it is, I think it's about having that business plan, having that vision of what you want the business to be, really focusing on that, but being adaptable to the change that comes, particularly from the technology, but also on the, in your space, mate, with marketing, print media, for example, is what was big in print 10 years ago is almost a dead industry these days.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the quote that jumped to my mind as soon as you said that was, rather than doing, I think it was, 4,000 tasks 3 times, do 3 tasks 4,000 times. And I think it's doing those principles again and again and again and doing them really well will have a much more impactful, positive impact on your business than, trying to do too many things. And I agree with you that although, things like social media and these digital channels that we're now using to grab the attention of customers and hold on to customers and, make our business more efficient, in the end of the day, the principles behind why you're using those pieces of technology are the same as what people would have done 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I've always, I suppose, come back to the sort of David Letterman TV show or those talk shows that used to be on late at night. And, Letterman used to have that top 10 list. And the reality is that I think business owners, as you say, it's quite easy to come up with a very long list of things that you would like to work on, but you just don't have the time or the resources to do all of them. And you really, if you try to spread yourself out, you're just going to do a lot of them really badly. So it's about having that core focus, pick a couple of things that you can work on right now, make serious change in those areas if you need to, or, whatever you're trying to do in that space, commit to it, focus, and execute. And once you've actioned that, then you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you've read the book, The 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch, where he talks about Pareto's law of that, the fact that 80% of your outcomes usually come from a result of 20% of your activities or inputs. And that sort of jumps to mind there, which is, I think you really need, as business owners, we want to do 1,000 things, but I think the more we can use data and use information to dive deep on where we're actually getting those 80% of our results from, we find that it will be only 20%. It will be this small section that if we can then focus on that, we're able to greatly reduce the amount of inputs that we need to do as business owners and yet be able to increase the amount of, profit or revenue that we're generating because of that.
Absolutely. And, that 80-20 principle applies. It's amazing how broadly it applies. It just seems to come up time and time again. Another idea is that, 20% of your clients will take up 80% of your time. And they tend to be your clients that are not profitable for you, purely because they take so much of your time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure I'm sure you're able to see that better than anyone, being in the accounting industry, right? Having access to all these organizations' data, I'm sure you're able to see that exact principle, Pareto's law, put in place time and time again.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, could you tell us a bit, since we're on the topic, how did you actually get into accounting, and how did you, I guess, where was your background from, and then how did that sort of evolve into having your own business?
Well, I enjoyed accounting at school. I think that's probably the easiest place to start. I enjoyed accounting at school, and so it was pretty natural for me to continue it on in university, study, do an accounting degree, and from there, mate, I've worked for a number of different accounting firms. I've been in accounting for over 20 years now, just over 20 years, and so I've worked for a few different accounting firms. But early 2016, or actually, it sort of really started in 2015, where I was just thinking if I was ever going to sort of do my own firm, and after being in the industry about 15 years at that point, there were things that I liked, there were things that frustrated me, and I just looked at it and thought, if there was ever a time where I was going to step out on my own and sort of try and run a firm according to the sort of values and ideals and plans that I wanted to put in place, then it was really, that was the time to do it. There was the good opportunity at that point just to step out and start Epoch, which I did.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I've been going in Epoch as my own business since March 2016.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that your sort of history, which I think a lot of people have a very similar history in the sense of they've worked in an industry or they worked in multiple industries for many years until they got to the point where they thought, I see parts that we can be doing better here and I want to make a change for the better.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, mate. You sit there and, like I said, there are things that you enjoy and you think that goes well, but there are a lot of frustrations along the way as well, particularly when you're in larger organizations, just the, trying to balance all the personalities. It can be a job in and of itself. So like I said, about 15 years ago, I just saw it as a really good opportunity for me to step out and start Epoch, which is, it's really about it. I've never designed Epoch to be a really big accounting firm. It's based on the number one principle is that the clients work with me. That's where the relationship sits. They're always communicating with me. They're not sort of calling up. It's a really common complaint in accounting because there is a lot of staff turnover in the industry as well. People, the average time somebody stays with an accounting firm is about 2 years. So you do have a lot of staff turnover across accounting firms. And it's a really common complaint of people calling up and, every time they call up, they feel like they're talking to a different person and they almost have to explain who they are all over again, even though they may have actually been with that accounting firm for quite a long time. It's quite a common complaint across the industry. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to address was that, the clients work with me and we have that relationship. We talk on a regular basis and, I pretty much know what's going on in their world before it happens, if you like, almost before it happens.
Yeah. And I think that speaks a lot about probably your clientele and the fact that then they are able to then become advocates for your business and you're able to retain them a lot, probably more effectively than maybe these other larger firms that like to pay them off to maybe like junior accountants and stuff rather than dealing with the more senior accountants that actually signed these people on. But before we get into that, I really wanted to maybe talk about there that the fact that you started this new business out of the gate, talk to me about how you were able to sort of attract customers into this new business. What sort of difficulties or struggles did you find? Were you able to bring clients across from previous firms that you worked for? How did that all pan out?
Yeah, it's interesting. When people, stepping out of an accounting firm and starting your own is not an unusual process, but most people who do it buy a fee base, so buy a client list, if you like. They're quite a saleable commodity, accounting clients or a list of accounting clients. And so that's how people tend to start, is that they buy something so that they have that income from day one. I didn't want to do that, again, because I was going to approach things a little bit differently. When you buy a client who's used to having an experience a certain way, when you try to change things, that gives them a good opportunity to go somewhere else. So, unless you're going to just keep doing things the same way, you're probably you're spending money to buy clients that you're probably not going to retain for very long. So it's not a very good investment. But it does mean starting with a blank piece of paper it's a pretty slow build, mate, to be honest. Certainly, I had a pretty good contact sphere from having been in the city for many years. Lots of different lawyers, in particular, bankers, financial planners, the sort of people who refer well with accountants. I certainly had a good network there, and it was interesting in that even some of my older clients who I hadn't worked with for a while because they were still maybe with a previous firm I'd left. Some of them did seek me out quite early, which was nice. That was very a very nice little thing to happen as well. But really, it was just about pounding the pavement, if you like. Working, communicating with my contacts, lots of meetings, lots of coffees, just explaining what I was doing with Epoch, why and why I was trying to do those things, why it meant something, and I think the pleasant surprise for me was that as I was explaining these things to different people, particularly the idea around that the client only works with me, and I'd committed to just doing fixed fees for pretty much everything, and catching up with clients on a quarterly basis, on a regular basis, so that I knew what was going on in their world. And as I was explaining these things, it just resonated. So it took off quickly. It took off more quickly than I thought it would. So that was the pleasant surprise out of it all, in that you can sit down and come up with a business plan and come up with the vision of what you're trying to execute. But until you actually sort of put it out there, you don't really know if there's validation for it or not.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a bit of a hard slog in terms of you went out there very much physically, and you were sort of out in front of people to reconnect with people that you'd already had sort of good connections with, as well as new people, and sell them, which is something that I always tell people to sell them on something a bit larger than yourself. I think if you sell someone just on who you are and what you can do, you're not really fulfilling the full potential of what you could offer them, which sounds like you sold them more on the idea of what you're bringing to the game rather than, just being part of the game. I was wondering, I know you're quite big in terms of, I know you, because I receive your emails regularly. So I know that's one strategy that you use, particularly then and then obviously now as well. Were there, was email something that you always sort of thought as a good way of keeping in contact with those and people, and then obviously finding new customers, or was that something that you sort of fell into?
No, it was very much part of what I wanted to do early on. So the number one thing that I email out on a regular basis is the monthly newsletter, which tends to be 3 articles that I've put together just around what's happening in or taxation in particular, but in business more generally. For example, the newsletter that we've just done had an article about retaining staff. So it's more of a HR style article, if you like. But it was very much a part of what I wanted to do, because it gave me an opportunity to, as I was meeting lots of new people, particularly early on, adding them, getting their okay to add them to the mail list, and so every month they were getting something from me. My brand was, front and center for them on a monthly basis. And then there was also, if something came up out of it, they might pick up the phone, but obviously as you're sending these emails out, you get all the analytics of who's opening what articles. And it does mean that you can pick up the phone. If you see somebody's really opened an article a couple of times, they're obviously interested in it, which means it's an opportunity for you to pick up the phone and go, hey, how are you going? And just have a little connection with them and see if that's an opportunity to open the door with them, even if they're not a client at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious. So the basic principles that you just talked about were, I guess, being on the forefront of potential customers and current customers' mind, using some sort of data to see how connected they were. But most importantly, you were there providing monthly newsletters plus some other emails which provided value, not necessarily specifically to accounting and the financial world, but also in other areas of business. Are there any other, I guess, platforms or techniques that you used in terms of you following those same principles, being in front of people and providing value that you ever thought about jumping into or you have jumped into that have worked?
It's a really, you asked me that at a really interesting time. So certainly repurposing a lot of that newsletter content through LinkedIn in particular is something that I do. So quite active on LinkedIn as well. That seems to work well for particularly professional services industries like accounting. But in terms of marketing, it's an interesting thing at the moment because for myself and I think for accountants in general, last year was an incredibly hectic year with COVID. A lot of the government stimulus measures were tax-based measures. They were around putting money into businesses that have employees, that sort of thing, and they were very tax-based. So, it's one of these traps you can fall into where you're so busy that you don't do the marketing, and that's that there's going to be a point where the activity just declines purely because you're not front and center in front of people's in people's minds anymore. So, in terms of what I'm looking at doing moving forward, I think one of the other things that's come from COVID is that geographic location is and the adoption of technology have shifted quite a lot. So it doesn't, just talking about that geographic location thing, I don't think being a Brisbane-based accounting firm, targeting purely Brisbane-based clients, for example, is relevant anymore. And particularly with the adoption of technology, people are much more comfortable with doing, video calls or whatever the case might be. So location's less relevant, which means webinars in particular are something that I'm looking at the moment as a way of continuing that journey, if you like, of providing content to existing clients, but also potential contacts, potential clients that are looking for that sort of support, and probably something that's a little bit more than just putting some numbers on a bit of paper for the tax man.
Yeah, definitely. I challenge you on the fact that I don't think the fact that geographical location doesn't play a role anymore. I don't think it's played a role for a number of years. I think the mindset of people has changed in certain industries, but I don't think the actual ability to get in touch with those people has. I think it's just our own internal mindsets have now said to us, oh yeah, we don't really need to do this. Where I think before, the people that were sort of maybe holding themselves back from reaching out to interstate or international clients was more an internal mindset thing rather than an actual physical, no, I can't work with those people for, X number of reasons. But yeah, I definitely see something like a webinar and those sort of strategies be of significant benefit for people for the same reason that we just talked about. You're able to provide value, get in the front of people, and then, present them with some sort of offer, which is, predicated on the fact that you're standing out there in a way that not too many accountants, I think, do on a regular basis. And I think it's one of those industries that probably are more traditional in how they think they should present themselves. And I think there's a couple examples out there of people that have gone out and done something a bit different and seen, dramatically improved, I guess, increase in leads and clients based on their willingness to then try these new means.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd say you're right about that first thing too, mate. It's probably humans being creatures of habit. We don't necessarily change until change is put on us. So okay, I think you're probably bang on with that idea that we could have done this years ago, but it was just that bureaucratic inertia, if you like, of to keep continuing to do the same thing day after day.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious with the webinars, what made you think specifically of doing webinars perhaps over, other forms of content on different channels? Why webinars? What attracted you to that?
for me, I think it's taking a step back. I mean, workshops are something that are quite common in accounting as well, doing workshops with clients. For me, mate, it's, again, because the whole idea with Epoch is the clients work with me. It's about the relationship as much as it is about the actual content and technical skills and abilities you bring to the table. Webinars give me the opportunity to get in front of people. They can see me, sort of listen to how I speak, and they're either going to have a positive reaction to that, hopefully, or they'll go, this guy's not for me. But at least they've made that choice of, been able to make that choice, if you like.
Yeah, which then helps for you, obviously, because then you're able to qualify the buyers, or those that are actually interested in working from you, from those that are perhaps, were potentially interested once they've sort of come to you. You don't necessarily then have to spend that extra time following them up physically, because they were someone that sort of opted out early on, or whatever it might be. I'm curious, is the technique you're using around webinars, are you looking to do this, live weekly, live monthly, or are you thinking more of an evergreen model, something that you can, I guess, pre-record and have there for a couple of months to use as a bit of a lead generation tool? Had you thought about that, or?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I suppose the idea of the recorded content is very new to me. So that's one I'm still trying to get my head around, to be honest. And there are, in a 12-month period, there are certain things that are topical. So certainly the idea of live content is something that you can roll out on a schedule, if you like, because there are certain things you can talk about at certain times and they'll resonate very well with people. For example, the obvious one right now coming up to 30 June is tax planning. What are some tips and strategies that you can share with people to help them get the best outcomes for this financial year that's going to be ending in just under 2 months' time?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you say that, and I think that's great advice to maybe, not just other accountants that are listening to, but other people in industries where there is seasonality, and there are these points of the year that, require certain information because that's what's necessary based on, things like financial returns and tax returns. So I think you're probably making the right bet there in many ways, that that the calendar does definitely affect your ability to create evergreen content, and the content that is relevant. And that's just not obviously relevant to webinars, but just relevant in general. People don't want to see content that's might be relevant to them in 6 months' time. They need content that's relevant to them here and now, because that's what's going to attract their eyes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great. I'm actually very interested to see how you go with rolling that out. And I know I've worked with a lot of people that have worked with webinars, and they definitely use it as a bit of a, practice ground as well, because it allows them to work on this messaging that they use to reach out to people, as well as the structure, and as well as how they actually present these things. The webinars actually often start out very different from how they are then doing them 6 months later. They just constantly learn and adapt, and it ends up being this beast of itself, where it evolves so much that I've seen businesses that had initially started just wanting to use it as a bit of a, give some service, maybe get some leads, and it ended up easily becoming the main lead generation tool for them, based on their ability to sort of adapt it to what the people are actually looking for.
Yeah, well, it won't surprise me if I'll certainly be traveling along that journey, I think, because again, it'll be quite new to me when as we roll these out.
Yeah, brilliant. I think people have a lot to learn from what you've said today, which is, regardless of industry, I think being able to stay forefront of mind, being able to provide value, and most importantly, I think what you've just said there, which is remain topical to what's currently happening, in the news or the calendar, whatever, can be beneficial in so many reasons, not just for webinars or content that provides value, but even things like blog posts and content on social media. Being able to remain relevant to that and remaining at the forefront of industry trends gives you a much more likely chance of gaining increased organic traffic because of the people that are looking for those trends, particularly as they come over the next days or weeks. So I think it's really insightful, some of the things you've said today. I want to thank you for joining me. If anyone was interested in learning more about Epoch, where would you send them?
That's a great question. Obviously, we do have a website at www.epochaccounting.com.au. But I'm also always open to email if anybody has a query. Try to help as best as I can, and that's the best one is info@epochaccounting.com.au.
Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Julian. That is the end of this episode of Business Clicks Podcast.
Thanks for the invitation. It was my pleasure.
I'm your host, Adam Barbro. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Business Clicks Podcast.